And things went downhill from there. It was impossible to tune out the remarks made by Bishop Jakes throughout his sermon. Things like, "We've grown too accustomed to cute over conviction," were among his remarks. Furthermore, a thing's popularity is no indication of its anointing. The pain was felt by everybody who had followed Sarah's journey, even though he refrained from naming names. Could he be critiquing her leadership style in the ministry? Did he mean to imply that the church was on the verge of collapse, or even worse, was he trying to regain control? The mood at the Potter's house changed drastically as news of Bishop T.D. Jakes' surprise sermon spread like wildfire. Parishioners were taken aback. While some were pleased to see him return to the pulpit, others appeared perplexed or even anxious. There was more than meets the eye here. You won't believe what transpired after this. It felt like a return. Bishop Jakes was spotted in meetings that Sarah had previously conducted just 1 week after that fervent speech. He had moved out of the background, he had taken his place at the head of the table, and was now re-establishing his authority by issuing orders and rulings. The hushed murmurs rose in volume. Had there ever been a genuine change, or was this all a ruse? Listen up, folks. Rumor has it that tensions were building up behind the scenes. Now, there were two groups of quiet church personnel and elders. Some remained devoted to Sarah, believing in her ability to connect with a younger, more diverse audience through her authentic, approachable attitude. The church needed to get back to its roots of prophetic, daring teaching and conventional structure, so several silently agreed with Bishop Jakes. According to one account, it's more than just a debate over different preaching styles. It's also a struggle for the church's future. The most bizarre aspect then arrived. Speculation began to circulate that Sarah had been hatching a grand scheme that might have changed the course of events. She envisioned Woman Evolve becoming into its own independent church. It is, in fact, a distinct movement with its own leadership, vision, and worship group. Out of her father's shadow, she could pursue her true passion in this sanctuary. Bishop Jakes reportedly had it turned down, though, according to a leak from their press team. Reportedly, he obstructed the idea entirely behind closed doors rather than publicly or on social media. For him, the prospect of theological strife and muddled thinking on the church's mission and purpose was a real concern. Reports indicate that the father and daughter fell into a deep quiet as a result of that decision. They didn't speak to each other directly for weeks. Additionally, the vibe was different, despite how composed they seemed in public. There was a change. It was tangible to the spectators as well. During one joint engagement, Sarah was subtly interrupted mid-sermon by Bishop Jakes. It sounded harmless, perhaps even lighthearted, but viewers dissected it pixel by frame on the internet. Was it an attempt at gaining power or just a joke? Was it a sign that the current leader was still in control? The situation becomes even more dire at this point. Sarah, who used to talk a lot about her father in her sermons, started to mention him less and less, and people noticed. Instead of focusing on Bishop Jakes as her spiritual mentor, the clips began to highlight her own path. At the same time, Bishop Jakes' tone seemed more corrective than collaborative, appearing more frequently on Sunday posters, conference platforms, and even podcast interviews. The unique aspect of this narrative was not merely the reappointment of a church leader, but rather the parallel journeys of a father and daughter who were both entrusted with leadership roles and held in high esteem, yet found themselves separated by circumstances, yet residing in the same home. Life took a surprising turn, and although the services and sermons continued as usual, it became more apparent with each passing Sunday that something more profound was being revealed beneath the surface. The crowd marveled, but a lot of them felt something wasn't quite right. Everything about Bishop Jakes and Sarah's interactions, from the manufactured grins to the polite mentions and the rare shared moments, appeared staged. However, in the background, the legacy was beginning to crumble. Members of the church began to take sides, albeit in private, in prayer groups, and most notably on social media. Clip after clip emerged, revealing underlying tension, uncomfortable looks, moments cut short, or extended periods of stillness when there had been harmony. The congregation, which was the core of the Potter's home, was now emotionally bewildered. Those who had followed Bishop Jakes throughout the 1990s found solace in his homecoming. Power, discipline, and profound spiritual structure were the foundations of his sermons. According to them, someone even went so far as to say that the whole place changes when Bishop Jakes speaks. He issues orders rather than merely speaking. However, members of Generation Z and millennials experienced an abrupt estrangement. As a result of Sarah's messages, many had at last found their niche. Honest discussion of issues including trauma, recovery, despair, self-discovery, and metamorphosis. They had found a lifeline in her weakness. They sensed that something sincere was being pushed aside now that her prominence seemed to be fading. And this is the first appearance of the division on the internet. The father-daughter dynamic was analyzed like a court case in the TikTok and Instagram videos. Is the Potter's house splitting? is the title of the podcast, initially emerged. This isn't just a church battle, this is a generational clash, one creator went so far as to say. Indeed, they were correct. What onlookers saw wasn't a quarrel, but a metaphor of the struggles that churches all across the globe were facing. The conflict that arises when one must choose between clinging to the past and entering the future. But the startling part is right here. Based on information from reliable sources, most people were unaware that Bishop Jakes had no intention of stepping down. Age, shifting cultural norms, critical outsiders, and health concerns were among the factors that weighed heavily on the decision to transfer. Bishop Jakes allegedly began to feel like the ministry he had founded was becoming strange as Sarah's impact increased and her sermons reached millions beyond the church gates. He may not have spoken it directly, but his return to meetings, regaining the pulpit, and restructuring of leadership spoke volumes. It was obvious. Once again, he believed he was required by the church. Believe me when I say this has nothing to do with the pulpit. What the future held for the Potter family was at the heart of the matter, as were questions of power and legacy. Things became even more uncomfortable when financial backers, some of whom had contributed for decades, started to doubt the new course of action. Observing her father stealthily reclaim it, she found herself in an impossible situation behind the scenes as donations reportedly plummeted and veteran members started fleeing. The most insane aspect, there were rumors circulating, but neither of them addressed the situation head-on. Instead of making remarks or giving interviews, they chose to remain silent, which said more than words could. The longer it remained quiet, the more noticeable the tension became. What happened was no longer the only question. Its next step is unclear. The atmosphere in the Potter's house changed, becoming heavier as the weeks progressed into months. The congregation continued to gather, the choir continued to perform, and the lights were lowered before each sermon. There was a subtle anxiety, though, and it seemed like everyone was waiting for something to crumble or reassemble. And things went downhill from there. Outside the church gates, people started to take note. All around the nation, pastors, leaders, and spiritual influencers began to take notice, not only the believers. This had become more than simply a family matter. What transpires when tradition and change collide was the subject of this case study. Also, they aren't ready to wave goodbye. Reportedly, a number of well-known preachers did things that you won't believe. Some people behind the scenes contacted Bishop Jakes to offer him their support, while others were worried and wanted him to exercise caution. They were worried that the rift between him and Sarah would send the wrong message to churches worldwide, implying that leadership changes, particularly those inside families, are inherently difficult and painful. Despite their authority and prophetic calling, the Jakes family was nevertheless just like any other group of people, a schism that could no longer be concealed. 2 leaders, 2 vocations, 1 stage. The course of destiny suddenly, abruptly changed. Sarah started to withdraw, not completely disappearing, but changing her presence. Once again, her sermons took on a more personal tone and felt more autonomous, less concerned with the layout of the Potter's home and more with her own area, stage, audience, and speed. Nobody knows for sure if that was voluntary or coerced. Close observers, however, noted that she appeared to be rediscovering her voice, albeit in a different setting. Even as this was happening, Bishop Jakes started making appearances more frequently, and soon he was hosting the show. His sermons regained their fervor. His voice was forceful, abrupt, and frequently brimming with a sense of urgency. Seemed like he had returned to defend something or maybe mend something he believed was damaged. However, this narrative is unique in this regard. Their fights were always private. On the internet, they never hurled shade. There was no public comment or accusation made by either of them. Anyone with eyes could see the storm that was quietly brewing beneath the surface, even though they kept it calm, courteous, and respectful. Either the handoff was never completely acknowledged or it had failed. What became of the Potter's dwelling is an open subject. Had Sarah's original intent been revived, or had it gone back to its original creator? Did the next generation get support, or were they being systematically wiped out? On Sundays, the individuals occupying those seats had varying responses. As they watched Bishop Jakes rebuild the house, some felt a sense of calm. Others were hurting because they could feel Sarah being pushed aside. The congregation, who had sought direction, solace, and spiritual sustenance, found themselves entangled in a legacy that was complex, spanning 2 eras and a pair of leaders. The true surprise in this story wasn't about whose sermons were more eloquent or whose leadership was more prolonged. It pertained to a more fundamental matter. one that every congregation, household, and generation must confront at some point. When the next generation is prepared to take the reins, but the old generation refuses to let go, what then